Good afternoon, everyone. We're in the Pit of the Home meeting for Tuesday, October 16th. Health and Squallow, please to Lupton, Glasgow-Holmish, Awayamayo. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There is an agenda in front of the committee and looking for a motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Doug, second by Karen. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. First up, we have business 3.1, which is our Squamish Child Care Needs Assessment and Strategy. And I'll pass it over to Sarah, but I would like to invite anyone. I know there's a lot of people who work in this realm in the audience, so please join us at the table. Our committee meetings are very collaborative, and we want to hear your thoughts, your questions, your ideas on how we move this forward. So I'll pass it over to Sarah to maybe introduce who's at the table now, and then please join us if you want to come and add your 2 cents.
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman. Hello, Council, and to everyone chiming in from online at home. My name is Sarah McJanet. I'm a community planner. Today we are presenting the finalized Child Care Needs Assessment and Strategy. This was prepared by Spark BC, the Social Planning Research Council of BC, and with me is Lara Terrien-Bulos, who is one of the lead planners that was involved in this project. And this project was actually led by and managed by Ali Redding, who's the Putting Children's First coordinator for Squamish through Sea to Sky Community Services. The district contributed funds for this child care assessment and strategy in 2018, augmenting provincial funding from the Ministry of Children and Family Development for the province. I have been participating with this project, representing the district and community interests and playing a support role during its development, and also participating as a partner and stakeholder in the process. We have a tight presentation that Laura is going to lead, and then we also added 5 slides at the end to provide an update on the Squamish Avenues of Change project, because we understand that it came up at a council meeting a number of weeks ago. So before the end of this council's term, we wanted to give a little status update on that. So I will turn it over to Lara now.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be here on Squamish territory. So we thought that we would start a little bit with the project purpose, and then I'll talk about the engagement. So the purpose of the needs assessment and strategy is to set a vision, strategic priorities, and new child care targets for the next 5 years in the community, with the intention of improving the access rate for affordable, accessible, and high-quality child care for families and children that are in line with projected growth for the community. And then as part of that, the strategy also establishes the organizational structure through which the strategy would be implemented. And that is a collective approach, which we'll get into as well. And then the monitoring and the evaluation of that process as it proceeds between 2018 and 2023. And then giving some guidance to the district council and staff on what the specific responsibilities might look like for the people in this room, or those who will follow after the election. So in terms of the engagement that we did to speak with community members, we sent out a parent and guardian survey to ask about the current state of childcare for parents and families. In April 2018, we had 478 respondents, which is a very high return rate, and I think speaks to the fact that this is very top of mind for a lot of families in the area right now. We also heard from 26 child care providers through a survey as well, so getting that perspective from the people who are actually working in the field. And then we did 3 in-person engagement sessions in June, one with stakeholders, many of whom are in the room here, which was great, so people who are working in the child care industry in the area. One session with parents and caregivers, and then another session with child care managers and operators. So deepening those conversations, it allowed us to bring forward some of the data that we had collected, some of the kind of current context, and understand what the gaps in our understanding were at that point, and then getting into some of the possible solutions to some of these issues. And then as we got into the drafting of the strategy, we also sent the strategy to 7 key stakeholders for their feedback too. So in terms of that childcare context in Squamish, Probably some of this is familiar to all of you and a story that you know quite well, but between 2011 and 2016, Squamish has seen a 16.3% increase in the number of kids aged 0 to 14, which is compared to a 2.1% increase in the province. So there are a lot of new kids that are entering this community, whether it's new births or people who are moving with their young children to the area. And in terms of the family structures, 36% of families are single parent families, and then the remaining 64% are dual parent families. We also know from the Early Development Index, the Wave 6 of data that came out for 2016, that 32% of children in Squamish North are experiencing one or more vulnerabilities in their developmental health, and that rate is 38% for kids in Squamish South. So there are some things that young kids that are starting kindergarten are not necessarily fully developmentally ready for, and a good amount of research that shows that strong childcare can be a really great solution to reducing some of those vulnerabilities. In terms of the actual population, so we talked about the increase. In 2016, the Census of Canada data reported 3,866 children between the ages of 0 and 14. And also as of 2016, in Squamish, there were 779 licensed childcare spaces, split between 32 residential childcare facilities and 11 commercial childcares. So that amounts to an access rate of 20 spaces for every 100 children ages 0 to 14, which is not that high. Move on to the next slide. In terms of some of the needs, so we know of some supply challenges as well. In terms of scheduling and wait lists, 49.3% of parent responders on that survey that I mentioned responded that they need full-day childcare. 42.1% of parent respondents needed some form of after-school childcare, and 25.3% of parent respondents currently have a child on a wait list for childcare. And we also know that a lot of people are commuting out of Squamish to go to work, whether that's in Pemberton or Whistler, Vancouver, elsewhere. And so the timing of the schedule, or the schedules that they need for childcare are also impacted by those longer days because they're commuting farther away. So that's specific to the Squamish context. And then of 26 childcare provider survey respondents, just one program reported that they offered care on a Saturday and none of them on Sundays. So for anyone who might be working a more shift-based work or any kind of, not a 9 to 5 essentially, it can be really hard to find childcare during those weekend times too. And then we've also heard some anecdotal stories that some families are actually putting their children in schools where they're going to work. So some people who are maybe working on the North Shore who are putting their kids in school in the North Shore, childcare on the North Shore. And so that has implications as well in terms of those families, networks, and support systems in Squamish, right? Because they're not necessarily accessing services here. So that's something to consider too. In terms of staffing challenges, when we spoke with childcare operators, they talked in a lot of depth and with a lot of nuance to some of the issues that they're seeing that are making it difficult for them to find and retain qualified early childhood educators. So namely, the high cost of living in Squamish, the difficulty of finding affordable housing in particular is a barrier for early childhood educators, and then high education requirements to work in the field, but then low wages in the sector. So there's a bit of a mismatch there. And we also know that that combination of high cost of living and low ECE wages has contributed to some childcares closing quite recently as well. Some people are retiring, some people are moving away because they just can't afford to live and operate or work in a childcare facility in the community. And so of course that affects supply, which affects the scheduling and the wait lists and all of those factors. And then in terms of space shortages and challenges, so building a little bit on the previous slide, over 2 in 3 parents who responded to that survey felt that there was not an adequate supply of childcare in Squamish. And then on the operator side of things, 73.1% of the childcare operators who responded to the survey talked about facing space challenges. So either they're finding it difficult to expand their existing facilities, the design of their program space might make it difficult for them to expand or renovate it to get to a licensed childcare space, and those kinds of issues. And then more broadly speaking to the financial concerns and affordability in Squamish as a community, we also know that 9.9% of children ages 0 to 5 years old in Squamish are living in low-income families. Just 47% of parents who responded to the survey said that the current childcare fees they were paying were sustainable for their family. And in terms of shelter costs, so kind of circling back to that affordable housing piece, 21.8% of owners and 36.4% of renters are spending 30% or more of their income on shelter costs, and that's from 2016 census data. So that paints a bit of a picture for where we are, what's going on in Squamish, and how childcare is woven in with all of these other factors that you grapple with in terms of providing services for community members. So, given all of this knowledge, we did a bit of work around population projections for the next 5 years and possible targets to address these childcare needs that are expressed by families in the community. So the access rate targets are essentially going forward so that Squamish knows what to aim for, given the potential growth trajectory for the community and with children in particular. And the deep dive into the needs assessment that we did really gave us a strong evidence base to be able to understand what might be needed. So we used growth projection rates that the district has employed in other recent planning analyses to extrapolate what a lower and a higher population projection might look like, what those scenarios look like. And then we developed two levels of targets for spaces accordingly. So either keeping the access rate constant at 20 spaces per 100 children, or if we increase it to 30 spaces for 100 children, we're calling that the REACH target, which would bring it to a slightly higher rate than the District of North Vancouver rate of 27.1. And we have a bit of a diagram in a moment that actually shows where Squamish lands in terms of access rates with other municipalities locally, then also provincially and nationally. So the maintainer access rate corresponds to between 18 to 23 new spaces per year times 5 years, depending on the growth experienced. And then the REACH target would have between 105 to 112 new spaces per year over 5 years. And Sarah is going to speak a little bit more to those growth rates that we used.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So initially we were looking at the District of Squamish Community Housing Needs Assessment that was done by Macola in 2018. And it showed basically a 2.4% annual average growth rate for the last between 2001 and 2016. We actually figured out after the fact that there was a bit of an error in that calculation. In fact, we experienced 2.5% average annual growth during that time. And then going forward, we might be expecting more of a 2.7% growth going forward. What we're trying to do now, recognizing that there's all kinds of planning going on for infrastructure, housing, childcare, we really need to align and integrate and make sure that we're actually we've got a consistent projections that we're using across the board so that we can be a bit more consistent that way. And in the OCP, as you know, we were also looking at more of like a higher growth scenario of 3% annual growth. And so showing the 2.4% and then the 3% here, it's just basically used to show kind of that spectrum, lower to higher, to give you a sense of the number of spaces that would be needed with those types of growth. And then I put this graphic together basically just to show in relation to where we sit within the region, provincially and nationally. So within the Metro Van region, the access rate was 18.5 spaces per 100 kids aged 0 to 12 in 2015, and that's in line with the BC average. The North Shore communities have higher access rates, so the City of North Van is at 24, District of North Van 27, and West Van is just below that at 25.6. Across the country, Saskatchewan has the lowest access rate at 7.6. And then contrast that with Quebec, and Quebec's provincial average is 37.4. So you can sort of see where Squamish sits. So right now we're at 20 spaces per 100 children. That's kind of the maintainer target if we chose to sort of sit at that kind of where we sit now, versus an ambitious REACH target for 2023 at 30. We know that there's current challenges with the access rate that we have right now, given the wait lists and some of the issues that were surfaced through the engagement. So a higher rate is likely advisable, so to basically bump up to. However, an access rate of 30 might be quite ambitious out of the gate, so, but it does provide a bit of a reach goal on the horizon. Through the continued work with community childcare partners, we will need to further consider these targets in conjunction with the specific action items in the strategy. So we're not necessarily recommending a target rate of X at this moment in time, but something that needs a little bit more thought and work.
So just get this clarified in my mind. A higher number is good.
Yeah.
A lower
So
number
you have-
is bad.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the higher number means that there's more childcare spaces. That's the ratio of childcare spaces per 100 children.
I just wanted to make sure it was clear in my mind.
Yes.
Yeah, higher is better.
Higher is good.
Clarification on
Yeah, on the
statistics?
number. So the babies being born versus the incoming families, have we been able to assess? I know to date, we've had 360 kids born this year, not even to January. And the influx of kids as well. So are we?
That statistic is really hard to figure out. I know as background, I'm pointing at public health because I work for public health as well. And we're actually feeling like we're seeing a lot more families that are having their kids born in the city and then moving up within the first month, moving up within this, they're 6 months. So right now, there's no one is keeping track of that data. So that's something that maybe the district, I don't know how that would be done, and I don't think it's being done in other municipalities.
So our growth
either.
rate isn't really, it's not really contingent on all of these things until we have the census data. That's what we really need for.
And that's why this is all based on the most current census data, because all we know is that birth rate and we don't know that incoming rate.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much of that is challenging because it's really anecdotal at this point. I mean, you look at those growth rates and you're only looking at maybe 600 or 700 new people in town every year based on those growth rates. However, we know that every year we're doing building permits for 400 or 500 units. So when those come online, the growth rate might take a real big jump. And I think we're probably likely underestimating, particularly the last 2 years in terms of the growth rate. So it really is
It's an imprecise science and art. Yeah,
It's as good as we can
definitely.
get, But I think
Yeah.
having those projections sort of low to high is important.
And that was really the thinking, is kind of benchmarking it a little bit to kind of try to capture a couple of different scenarios, but recognizing that, there's so much that we don't know.
The school district is also trying to tackle this and looking at that, so we're comparing notes.
Yeah, that's right. Great, so we'll move into the strategy piece of the presentation in the document. So the guiding principles that really underpin the whole strategy moving forward can be boiled down to 3. So first, promoting shared leadership and collaboration. The strategy's implementation will really be dependent on both political support of elected officials and then district staff, and then also community partners that share the responsibility for its rollout. So taking a collaborative approach will help all partners develop a sense of accountability and ownership over the strategy and its implementation. We also have a big focus on equity within the strategy, so applying an equity lens to the strategy is essential to ensure that the improvements that are being made in childcare consider the range of demographic characteristics and systemic barriers that families may be facing as they're working to access childcare in Squamish. And then finally, engaging the community meaningfully. So that was something that we strove to do throughout developing the strategy and the needs assessment. And effective and meaningful community engagement includes not only informing the public of the strategy's progress, but also inviting citizens to share their perspectives and ideas throughout the implementation process and potentially adjusting it based on what the needs of the community are shifting, or how they're shifting. So in terms of the actual vision, strategic directions, and actions, the vision is for Squamish families to have access to a range of affordable, accessible, high-quality childcare options that meet the demand throughout the community and support children's healthy development. And in the strategy, we further define what affordable, accessible, and high quality actually means in this context, to kind of give a little bit more weight to those terms. And then there are 3 directions and then actions clustered within each of those. So the first direction is prioritizing a whole community approach to childcare. So again, going back to that shared leadership principle, that's the strategy direction that really kind of implements that into an actionable set of things that people can be doing. Direction 2 is around increasing childcare accessibility and affordability, and then direction 3 is around improving childcare quality. And then there's a certain number of actions within each of those directions. And those actions have been categorized into some buckets, so around policy and planning, advocacy, direct support, whether that's for families or for childcare operators or for both, partnerships and collaboration, and then information sharing. So it's fairly ambitious. There are a lot of things that can be done. And in that section of the actions and strategies of the document, we do have these tables with the actions suggested, a time frame, and then possible partners. So starting to identify who could be involved. And that leads us into talking a little bit about the implementation structure. So we're proposing an implementation committee structure that would be responsible for implementing this childcare strategy, that would have cross-sectoral membership. So we have some possible member agencies and groups listed there for you to consider there. Attention to demographic diversity would be an important element of putting that committee together as well. The suggestion is that there be a District of Squamish staff liaison who would be appointed and supporting the committee, and then also taking the lead on the actions that are district specific within the strategy too. And there would be a role for that committee in monitoring and reporting back on the progress of the strategy's implementation to both council and to the broader community. And
I'm going to jump in also. This relates to the recommendations that we're bringing forward today for your consideration on the next slide. But firstly, there are 2 new provincial funding programs for the childcare sector that were announced in September that will be administered through UBCM, and they aim to improve access to childcare with the goal of creating thousands of new licensed spaces in BC over the next 3 years. The funding that you see on the screen, it's available to local governments and also for collaborative projects, but it's primarily for local governments to apply. For community childcare via these 2 distinct program streams. The first is for space creation action planning and action plans to meet childcare targets. So there is a grant available up to $25,000 to put in place action plans. We've already done a lot of the legwork that this grant is being presented for local governments. So we've already established the inventory, we've got a strategy, but in looking at the grant application, there is an opportunity here to leverage funding for our next steps in terms of implementation. So we've got a whole bunch of identified actions. We could pick a series of actions and then get leverage funding for advancing with those actions, engagement, further analysis, and supporting that. So that's an opportunity on the horizon. The second funding stream is for new licensed space creation within government-owned facilities for children aged 0 to 5, and that funding is available for focusing on spaces for infants and toddlers. And there is up to $1 million available to local governments for that grant. These grants do present an opportunity to work with partners in the community. We've already started to have some internal discussions with staff across departments, so with community services, recreation, real estate. We've been looking at opportunities to co-locate childcare at Brennan Park or seek funding to advance childcare, possibly at school district sites and whatnot. So there's a lot of work and circling around this grant opportunity that needs to happen pretty quickly if we wanted to go for it. The deadline for the grants is January 18th, 2019. For the space creation stream, the eligibility is for both new space or renovations to existing spaces, government-owned facilities. Can include infrastructure costs, building purchase, their buildings or modular buildings. It can cover site development costs, equipment, capital costs to allow a facility that's maybe existing to become operational and to become licensed under the licensing regime. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And so that's part of the recommendation, the 3 recommendations that we're bringing forward. Firstly, the recommendation is for the district to receive and endorse the Squamish Child Care Needs Assessment and Strategy. I just note that in the agenda today, I think it says 2018 to 2021. That should be 2018 to 2023. Secondly, that the district designate a staff liaison to collaborate with an emerging child care strategy implementation committee to support advancement of child care actions and partnerships. And thirdly, that the District of Squamish directs staff to work with the implementation committee to prepare and submit grant applications under the UBCM 2019 Community Child Care Action Planning and Space Creation programs by January 18, 2019. Just a couple final notes. The second recommendation around staff liaison, we are not recommending a new staff hire. This would be something that it would be a formal designation of an existing staff person, probably within our existing, our planning work plan. And this is really helpful to have a point person and resource within the community or within planning, share information, develop subject matter expertise, advance actions, work with the implementation committee. So very much some work that's already been happening, not a new hire. And then also to the last point, just around the grant opportunity, there is some urgency around that. So we wanted to bring it forward to council just to see whether it was hitting the mark for council, and if council agreed, we would advance on that, but we would need to bring back a proposal in front of the next council to provide an update on what we figured would be the best fit and opportunity for the grant. So with that, I will put it to council.
Great, I've got Councillor Race and then Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you. So the children, you define children as 0 to 14, and 20%, there's 20 spaces per 100. But forgive me if I'm missing something here, I'm not a parent, but when I drive by the daycares and so forth, I mean, they seem to primarily be preschool age. Are there other types of facilities? Is the deficit kind of across the board, or is it weighted towards one or the other? I'm just not familiar with the higher age types of facilities.
That's a great question. Do you want to?
Sure. So 2 things. The census data is 0 to 14 years, so it was really hard for us to pull12, 13, 14-year-olds don't need childcare anymore. So there's that piece, and it's just the data that's presented is 0 to 14, so we had to go from that perspective. Second piece is tons of families in Squamish need before and after school care, as well as summer care and Pro-D daycare. So that takes in the age 5 through 12, depending on the child's piece of care. So it is children up usually until, I don't have kids that old yet, but I would say most parents usually start letting their kids stay home around 12. Yeah. So there is a kind of a weird link there. Yeah.
And the spectrum of needs is very diverse, as you point to.
But just if I can follow up, but for comparison purposes, I mean, that's the same sort of yardstick that the other municipalities are using as well, so it's a relative term, really.
Yeah.
Is there no way to, just building on the census, is there no way to, through the school system, drill down in terms of the age groups within that 0 to 14?
You mean to pull out the data to figure
To figure out how many are in the school system and how many are 5 and below, let's say. At least to figure out the numbers. Because the 1 in 20 is based on 1 in 20 for that whole cohort of 0 to 14.
Yeah.
And if we have more younger kids, It's an
Right.
even worse problem. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to tease out some of the information you can get from the school district on ages and subtract that from the overall
Yeah.
cohort to figure out the real need within that 0 to 5.
And we do know, and other folks, do you want to comment?
Well, I think
You have to
that
come up,
Susie, if you want.
Yeah, come on up. If you're gonna speak, you gotta come and join us at the table just because the
I
microphone's
think that
down.
what you're saying sounds really doable. The issue is that the schools don't necessarily know how many kinders are going to be in that school until they're in that school. So even just recently, we had a classroom in Mamquam Elementary, we were good to go, we were in there. 10 days later, 2 weeks after school started, they had more kinders than what they were expecting.
Yeah.
So we got shifted out. So even,
not gonna be
that
perfect, but-
quickly.
but it might
they can
help.
try.
Tease a little bit more information that might be helpful for.
Yeah, they start registration for kindergarten in January, but even in September, they were surprised.
Yeah, and I think the scope of the problem is massive, so starting to eat away at building daycare spaces and applying for funds to do so is an essential step that we have to take. And I wonder about, we have spaces that are closing, so it's not so much spaces. The biggest thing that's always irked me is the wage disparity. Because if you can't afford to live in a community, because the housing prices are, because of housing prices or whatever, affordability issues, the education is extreme, and the wages are low, that's a provincial action. Is there some sort of advocacy role built into this, into the recommendations that can start Squamish playing a bigger role at the provincial level at advocating for better daycare wages? Because we're asking people to raise our children, and we're paying them not much more than minimum wage right now. And it's if you can't find workers, you can build all the space you want, but if you can't find people to fill those spaces, that becomes the problem. And sitting empty spaces that actually take up economic development land, then you're building empty daycare spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah, so page 21, in strategic direction 2, which is all around increasing childcare accessibility and affordability, that direction is both geared towards accessibility and affordability for families and for workers. And there's an advocacy subsection in the table, so actions 2.8 to 2.11 speak to exactly what you're talking about. Perfect. Yeah.
Just building on that, if maybe you could just outline the provincial funding that is going towards correcting this disparity that Councillor Schmidt talked about.
Shall I speak to that? So starting January 1st, 2019, there will be $1 an hour given to ECE workers in the field if they are working 20 hours more a week and they haven't been employed since September 1st, 2018. Will be retroactive, and then in 2020 there'll be another $1 an hour increase for ECE. So that's one way the government's addressing. We think that's fantastic, but needs to be more.
So just, what would be an average wage for ECE?
$21 an hour.
But there are also more casual staff who are working in early childhood, and I think the estimate around that is $14 to $16 an hour in Squamish, and then people who maybe don't have their full qualifications might be making around $18 an hour in Squamish. And then a fully qualified ECE would be making the 21. I think that's what we figured. Yeah, so there's still a range as well within that, for the licensed qualified staff.
I know in listening to childcare advocates at UBCM and that sort of thing, they talk about the importance of having a choice of childcare. And I know you pointed out that we have 32 licensed home daycares and 11 commercial operators. In your data, did it show where we needed to expand, or is it expanding on both? Or do you have a sense of that?
I don't
or
know that we
preference?
got that from, I do remember during the parent engagement session when we had parents in the room, and there were 10 parents and there were 10 different opinions of what they were looking for, right? So it's difficult to kind of pinpoint to a particular area to grow. I think ultimately, given that the access rate is so low, any additional opportunities anywhere at this point would be beneficial.
Something to note is that in the majority of other communities, there are municipal run programs, and that is a missing link in Squamish. So just given that this funding, obviously it's probably why the funding is there, because it's to help municipalities to really support childcare. So just comparing to different, communities in the city, most of them do run their own programs too, and that is one of the missing links.
It's funny because when I went to the childcare session at UBCM, the woman from the ministry was standing at the door with her card going, I have money. Yes, why? I have money.
Yeah.
And you don't often hear government saying that, so it was funny. But one of the...
Ministry of Transportation is not saying.
One of the things you bring out in your report is some of the paperwork challenges, but also the disconnect between our building code and VCH requirements. And I wonder if you could just sort of elaborate on that a little bit more so I understand where the pinch points are.
So both of those are provincially legislated pieces of legislation. And so what we've heard from some of the childcare operators is they have license space for 8 and they want to expand to 16. And then once they want to do that, then the building code requirements kick in and they have to be set up as a commercial facility within their home. So all of a sudden they have to be putting things like, you can't have sliding doors, you have to have an exit sign, you have to have a separate sink that's not in the bathroom for the kids to wash their hands. And some of these things that make a lot of sense in a commercial space, but for someone who's running childcare in their basement in their home, doesn't make sense. And so those kinds of barriers have been brought up by childcare providers who are saying, I want to do it, I want to provide childcare for 16 kids or 12 or whatever, but I want to go up from 8, and these are really challenging things.
So we have an advocacy role to play there.
In terms of that alignment, yeah, that's what we're suggesting in, I think, the first action.
If I might add as well, some of the challenges that we've also heard about, and this is kind of across the board for Squamish, but in those residential settings as well, we've got like aging housing stock, and then to bring homes sort of up to code, like it can be a significant financial jump to basically bring buildings up to code, and then as Laura said, sort of address all of those different elements with a larger facility. So even though we bumped that to the 16, it really, in a residential setting, it is kind of creating more of that kind of commercial group childcare requirement. So that's something that we want to dive deeper into with the implementation committee and work with childcare operators and providers just to support greater alignment and understanding. And also in the report, we do have some funds that we collected over the last couple of years through individual rezoning projects for childcare CACs. So some communities use those for grants to childcare providers. So they run those, they'll do like a call out, and then there's a program that they institute, and then that can be going towards capital improvements for childcare facilities in order to make sure that they can get the licensing and the code updates that are needed. So that's an opportunity. We didn't put forward a specific recommendation around use of those collected funds to date. We want to discuss with the childcare implementation committee to figure out what would be the best use. We do know that CAC funds are best for capital improvements as opposed to operational funding. So we're thinking that the provincial funding for childcare action planning could be used to help operationalize and advance the actions with the implementation committee, because there's a larger funding shift that's also happening. So there's, and the two of you are probably best positioned to explain that, but it goes without saying, I guess, the Putting Children First table after 2019 March won't have the same funding that it has had for the last 17 years. So there's some funding.
It's being shifted, and it's still to promote early childhood development. It's just going to come through NCFD, so it's different. It'll be seen differently in the community.
Focus is more on direct service in the early childhood years, non-childcare related. So we'll see how that.
I'm just gonna jump my queue here a couple of spots. Councillor Chanel, step up for a little bit, so we'll go to.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering about business licensing as well. If how much we're charging currently for business licensing, or if we're giving leniencies for business licensing in order to encourage more in-home aid space daycares that are, that don't have the same barriers as a 16 space.
So the fee, business licensing fee for childcare providers is $1 per year. So that is like,
We did that about a year ago?
about a year ago, yeah. And so on the side of my desk, I've been just sort of highlighting all of these like important resources that we want to basically post online so that we have a single sort of source of truth resource around childcare licensing and zoning and all those pieces. So we'll be promoting that more broadly.
Thanks, and zero, we still have zero utilities, extra utilities, is that correct?
I would actually have to get confirmation from Mr. Buxton or over at the
Or Christine?
Utilities.
What does an in-home childcare provider pay in terms of utilities?
Just as, it's all treated as residential.
It's
Yeah,
all,
So
exactly.
there's only one fee.
It's not, yeah.
We changed that
Yeah.
5 years ago.
I'd have to check
No,
the
that's-
utility rates, so it's going to have to verify, but for taxation and everything, it's a cost.
That's fine.
Thanks. Susan, do you have any more before
Nope,
we run out the?
That's it, and I'm sure they'll come to us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Peter?
Just a quick question to your point, talking about people moving into town and having their children outside of town. I think we're going to start seeing more and more people actually who live here having their kids outside of town too, as well, because of the pressures at the hospital and beds not being available, et cetera. And so you're saying that those numbers sort of fall into a bit of a gray area because we don't really know if, that they're here. But I would think that through the Vancouver Coastal Health and the community services that you would see when they bring them in for registration. and
Yes, so
shots,
how
et
it
cetera.
works, any child that is born at St. Paul's, LGH, any of the hospitals in the city, but their address is in Squamish, we have record of those births. The data that's missing is if they're living in Vancouver when they have their baby, and then they move up here when the baby's 1 month old, or 2 months old, or 6 months, that's the data that's missing. So anyone that's here but has to be transferred to a different hospital to deliver, we have that data.
Thank you. Thanks
Yeah,
for the
that's
clarity.
included in our birth rate.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other question on that, so I have my hand up, but I'm wondering if all the births at this hospital are Squamish babies. And I don't know that either, but some might be from Whistler, Pemberton, or
Yes.
other places in the corridor.
Yeah.
So it kind of, once again, skews the figures.
No,
a
it
little bit.
doesn't. Our birth rate is Squamish, we do it through public health. So
Oh,
it's the
yeah. Okay.
babies that are born in Squamish that we see through public health or the midwife see. We have those numbers, the same for Whistler, the same for Pemberton, the same
Oh.
for Mount Currie. It's all,
Okay.
yeah.
The reason I have my hand up actually was going back to my first question. So I'm trying to think of the role that the district can play in this, and one of them is in the provision of facilities, because we do have ability sometimes in rezonings, for example, to compel developers to provide space. I've always thought of that when that's come before us as being the little kids. And so now, what I don't know is what types of spaces for the higher ages, maybe up to age 12. And it's maybe a bigger discussion than we want to have here right now. But, I'm looking at the planning department to start bringing some of those possibilities forward to us with some of these rezonings and other opportunities to see. And I don't know whether that's partnerships with the school district that we can deal with separately, but if there are things that we can get out of rezonings, for example, those types of facilities that might cater to a higher age group, to consider those. Because personally, I haven't been aware of that. I hadn't thought of facilities for higher age groups.
And it could be programming at Brennan Park in the library. and those types of
Absolutely.
things.
Yeah. And so,
Transportation, Brennan.
Yeah. Yeah, the neighborhood, like the OCP and the neighborhood hub idea is so key with childcare. If you can have a space that your child can walk to after school, that is safe, or some, like there's a program at the United Church now where they come and there's one person and she walks the group of children after school care, something like that that's accessible is so key, because lots of parents they're in Vancouver working, they can't get to the school and drive their child to after school care. So transportation is a big piece of it.
And transportation is walking.
Is walking, yeah, exactly, walking is ideal, yeah.
Well
Is there
said,
anyone
Ally.
like that?
Ally said it well, just around the neighborhood hub, certainly as we look to figure out space creation, where we want to focus those spaces within the community, we're also looking at the distribution of childcare facilities based on where children are in the community, to make sure that we've got broad distribution everywhere kids and families are within all neighborhoods, but also working with the school district will be important going forward, and then looking at those co-location opportunities. Certainly the district is not in the business of like running childcares per se, but the role that we play in facilitating and working with the development community, working with the school district, we can absolutely help to facilitate space creation in all those key areas. And then I've been sort of pulling Tim and the recreation services staff in to engage with us through this process, because rec services and the programs that are offered can absolutely fill gaps in after school programming, and sort of as kids get older, more independent, and in terms of arts and culture and recreation, there's an opportunity to make sure that the offerings that are available to the community can help serve they offer many co-benefits, and providing place of connection, gathering for kids, we can pull that into play as well.
So just quickly building on that, are there zones that we could add? Childcare might not be the right terminology, but some sort of youth or child care, so that a rezoning isn't necessarily impeding someone from going into a C3 or C4 or C9.
Yeah,
or
childcare
whatever.
is really broadly enabled throughout almost
Is it?
all of our
Okay, so
zones,
it's in all
yeah,
zones.
I would be surprised if there's an area where childcare, like in like intensive industrial, no, but in all of the residential and kind of commercial
All the zones.
neighborhood areas,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's-
Ted?
Yeah, thanks. Really good work. So, the big thing that stuck out to me was that $1 million grant. So that's what I'd be focusing on, really a lot of energy on that. Did you say they can use portables and stuff like that for that grant?
Yeah, the grant does speak to purchase and of modular buildings or buildings, not land per se, but yeah, it's quite broad in terms of the eligible costs. One conversation that we've initiated already internally is the opportunity to build in and add basically that layer of funding to, for example, like a Brent Park reimagination, because that's such a central area and facility that if there's an opportunity to do that, there's also other provincial grant funding that's on the horizon as well. So we just have to pinpoint what is the best long-term location for integrating new childcare space. The more money that is granted, so for example, grants of between $500,000 to $1 million, you have to commit to that childcare facility being in operation for 15 years. So these are long-term spaces, but we're going to be contacting the province to figure out exactly, once we have some ideas, to make sure that those would be eligible for
About
funding.
15 years goes by really quick.
Yeah. And it has to be in operation within 2 years as well, so it's a very quick turnaround.
That's what I'd be going for, something out there, Brent Park. Now, what about we're putting them on the schools?
So there's some action around developing a stronger relationship with the school district that would explore those kinds of opportunities as well, hopefully. Yeah, we did try to engage with the school district throughout the development of the strategy and had some difficulty in kind of pinning them down sometimes, but I think that starting point of starting a relationship is identified as one of the
I think it was
actions.
fascinating. Well, that development on the corner has a 60-kid daycare coming.
But they're already running in town. They're just moving into, they'll be in
Oh, really?
Jumar, yeah.
They can take some kids that are already in.
Yeah, they're just in a different location, so they'll move into, they're well established.
But that does
But
free up
hopefully
another
free up-
location.
Yeah, it frees up the
Yeah.
space. It frees up the space, that's true. Yeah.
Because I thought that was a good thing, and I think it's the
Yes.
And there's a number of those coming online. I remember when I first moved here, there was a daycare on the school property for teen pregnancy.
Yes,
Kids in high
which
school
we
that had
still
kids.
operate childcare out of there today.
Yeah,
That was 17 years ago.
yeah, exactly, yeah. I have Karen.
So 2 questions. I know people are trying to make a stronger connection between early years childcare and the education system, and that possibly it should be under the Ministry of Education. And I wondered if there's anything in our strategy that looks at building that stronger connection or encouraging childcare providers to understand themselves as educators, not just childcare providers. And how if we have a role in that, or if that's a provincial thing.
There is a piece in the strategy around public education, around the importance of early childhood education. Not specific to educators, but more, I think, for the public, because I think what I heard from the childcare operators often is feeling like they know they're educators for the most part, but they feel like parents don't necessarily see them that way, or it sounds like there's, you know, some kind of different perceptions, and so we did approach that piece, I guess, maybe from a slightly different direction in the strategy, to have a public education kind of awareness of the importance of early childhood education in general, which could certainly include a component to kind of bolster how early childhood educators see themselves too.
And that can start at the municipal level in terms of how we're framing the conversations around childcare, in the same way that, through the growth of the Children's Charter and sort of declarations of children's rights and right to education, and, what falls from that is around rights for education and care and belonging and those types of things. And then also, it's sort of like there's this whole wave around housing as a human right. And, I think there's a whole wave of sort of declarations that are kind of being made around that. And so we can continue to frame it that way.
Just one more question. Our next conversation is about the CAC policy, and I know council made a decision to take childcare out as a designated place to put funding.
It's back in.
Well, we did designate it, but I'm wondering if there's a thought that we need to be more specific rather than it just being a choice versus a mandatory contribution, given that if we're trying to reach our stretch goal, that's 112 spaces a year for 5 years. That boggles my mind. How do we build that? And so that's why I'm wondering if you would like to influence council's discussion that we're having next about where we see that money. I was sad to see it not as a designated pot of money. So,
well, I think council will be well supported in the discussion that's coming up next with Mr. Buxton, in that before you've got sort of I think hopefully a better understanding of sort of the crux needs within the community, and then what these targets actually look like. And if it's okay with council, I'd like to actually, and I'll stick around for that next conversation with Mr. Buxton to listen in. But for the purpose of following up with this presentation, we do have 5 more slides also around avenues of change. So if council's comfortable, we can sort of transition and then come back to that question.
I have a question before you move on. Sarah, you talked about our childcare CAC fund that we, I think the report says 40-some odd thousand
42, yeah.
in there.
Yeah.
And that other communities are using that to help childcare facilities, meet building code, blah, blah, blah. Legislation doesn't allow municipalities to help business. So it would only be nonprofits that could theoretically ask for a grant and aid, correct? Which is limiting, definitely. I just want to make sure that was clear.
Yeah,
we
we'd have
can't
to-
actually aid business, so I don't want child care providers that are trying to go from 8 to 16 out there going, oh, their district has a lot of money, we legislatively can't help business. In that regard, policy-wise and some other things, we can
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely that. that restriction would be something that we would need to consider carefully around any kind of grants. We do have lots of not-for-profit childcare providers within the community, so that would be a possibility, but at the same time, yeah, we can't use it for sort of operational funding, but we could consider that in conjunction with the other funding from the province that we could, for a larger facility.
Could we funnel it to a nonprofit who could then make discretionary choices, similar to how we do the public art, not public art, the Arts Council grant? I'm looking for Christine and Robin to make sure we're outside on those. They're not shaking their head. Maybe they didn't hear me.
Oh, I've heard.
Yeah.
We can bring that back to council because we need a resolution of council to allocate those funds, so we'll dive deeper on that.
So I think generally speaking, and maybe we'll just close this one off and then we'll go to the United Way project. I think this was really important foundational work. Like, this is what helped set us up to be successful in these grants. As with most of these things, there's still data that needs to be teased out to really get a full sense of what's going on and what needs to happen, but this is a really good start and really important work. So thanks very much for that. I thought the report was really well written, in-depth, yet concise, and really helps to inform, evidence-based decision-making in the future as opposed to sort of finger on the pulse kind of, finger in the wind kind of decisions. So this is really important. I'd like council committee to consider the recommended motions up there, but I also think it's worthwhile, and I think you've started that, Sarah, having those really comprehensive discussions within the rec department and other places to say, how can we look at our lands, school district lands, and really, ramp things up, accelerate things, so we can meet that January 18th target. Can you move the recommendations?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask one more question.
Okay, ask the question.
Yeah, with the schools, my experience with the schools has not been like they're really happy wanting to work with other entities. So have you found that in the daycare world? Like when you try to do things with them, it's usually...
If I can speak to that, Sea to Sky Community Services has had preschool age and before and after school care programs in our schools since 2008. It's only been in the last 2 years that we've had a big population growth and also more teachers to the system that is having us come out of the schools.
Well, I'm just thinking of the grants.
So we did apply for a grant and we are building a new building up at Garibaldi Highlands. That will be finished, we're moving into this week.
Wow.
The end of this week, and there's a grant going in for Mount Palm Elementary next.
Well, there's $1 million grant up there that says you can build things, and if we could build those, we could put a couple of portables on every school.
Absolutely,
With that
yeah.
money.
So I think that the appetite is there, we just need to build and grow.
Yeah, I'll move for you.
We can move all three of them, seconded by Peter. I think we've had a good discussion. Appreciate everyone's input on this and work. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Great, thank you. And we just have, I think, 4 or 5 more slides just on how these change. And so, this is a unique multi-year funding opportunity and partnership to address early childhood vulnerabilities in Squamish. It's with United Way of the Lower Mainland, and I want to invite Erica over the shoulder. Actually, Erica could just come up to the table. Erica Branson is a social planner with United Way Avenues of Change, and they have committed funding.
Just join any one of these two chairs. Yeah.
That won't wait.
United Way has committed funding to Squamish, and a lot of this sort of emerged out of, it had been on the table for a while, but really emerged out of conversation in the community and around the EDI, Early Childhood Development Instrument data over time. I'm going to turn it over to Laura because it was a really exciting collaboration between Spark BC and also the Emily Carr Health Design Lab. So yeah, so it's been a neat partnership, and Laura will tell you a little bit more about it.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's been such a joy to work on both of these at the same time and spend a lot of time in Squamish in the process too. So just on a personal note, quite lovely. So our first slide is really just to show the confluence between the childcare strategy work that we've been doing and Avenues of Change and what its goals are. So whereas the Squamish childcare strategy more specifically is looking at, leveraging a strong evidence base to secure funds for childcare spaces, support existing and potential spaces, improve information access to childcare related information, advocacy, some of the things that we talked about. Avenues of Change has a little bit more of a potential grassroots orientation to it, and so some of the unique elements of Avenues of Change and the opportunities within it include creating a shared agenda for a long-term vision for healthy childhood development, not necessarily just limited to child care, although it includes that potentially. Developing place-based solutions that are unique to Squamish and unique to what Squamish kids and families need. Increasing local community capacity to support children and families on a range of measures as well, and then again encouraging that kind of grassroots initiative to improve the local environment, safety, and other elements for children and families. And then where these two things meet is in addressing gaps in child-related services, improving school readiness, supporting parents, reducing vulnerabilities in kids, and supporting partnerships to achieve all of these desired outcomes. So these are really exciting aligned projects. They benefit each other, and it's been great to work on them at the same time.
And actually, Laura, before you go to the next slide, I just want to make sure Council, just sort of rolling back the tape, that the investment in Squamish that maybe Erica would like to speak to a little bit more is substantial. It's $100,000 per year for 4 years to really dive deeply around early childhood vulnerabilities that Squamish kids are experiencing and trying to figure out how we can change the dial on that. So I just want to give Erica maybe just a moment just to, as the representing the fund there.
Yeah, I think there's been a couple of questions before about what the funding pot is, and I think that what we've seen, Squamish will be the 6th Avenues of Change initiative that United Way has launched into, and we're still actually funding in the other areas at different amounts. So I think that this initiative is a little bit different than what you've traditionally seen from United Way, in the sense that this is the funding criteria, this is what it's about. If you fit, wonderful, apply. If you don't, then this isn't an opportunity for you. I think this is a little bit different in the sense that we've bookmarked, or we've thrown out there that it's a sort of this 3 to 5 year initiative at $100,000 a year. However, I don't think what that means is at the end of that 5 years, it's, December 31st, best wishes. We're still actually funding those other 5 initiatives, but in very different ways and in different amounts. So we see in Surrey that we're funding specifically with one Indigenous nonprofit agency, and still funding them at quite a significant amount. And then in other neighborhoods that we've been working in, where it's probably as low as $25,000 a year, because that project, or what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish, still requires funding. So I caution on saying it is absolutely it's a significant investment, but it's not an investment without considering what it is that we're wanting to accomplish, and a collaborative project in terms of what do we want to see different, what do we want to see change, or to see what happens differently. So yes, $100,000 a year, but not with the right. We're going to continue to have conversations and really see how United Way can continue to support what it is we're hoping to make different.
Yeah, this is not a problem that's going to be solved overnight.
No.
It's iterative over a long period of time.
And United Way knows that there's not one person or one entity or a specific amount of money that's going to all of a sudden make things different. So, thanks, Sarah. Thank you.
So in terms of where we are in this process in Squamish specifically, there's 3 phases to the Avenues of Change process. So phase 1 was around selecting and forming an advisory committee. Many of the people in this room here are part of it. So we have representatives from Sea to Sky, School District, Vancouver Coastal Health, Sarah sits on it, Squamish Nation, who am I missing? MCFD, thank you. So it's a really nice broad range of people who are working with children ages 0 to 6. And then selecting the specific site within Squamish. So that would be the focus area, which I'll speak to in a moment. Phase 2 is the phase that Emily Carr and Spark were hired to develop and work on. And so that has been essentially the exploratory phase. So really getting into Squamish and figuring out what's going on for families with kids 0 to 6. What are the issues? What are the challenges? What are the strengths? What are the places where we can be building? And what are the solutions that they want to see? So it's a really grassroots approach to understanding the community. And so we did that through some data collection and statistical analysis. Some of the statistics that we shared as part of the child care strategy certainly apply to the work of Avenues of Change as well for that 0 to 6 age group. We did some significant community engagement, which we'll speak to in a moment, as well as some key stakeholder interviews, so drilling down into the experiences of the people who are working with families and understanding their perspectives, and generating and prioritizing solutions. And then phase 3 will be implementing the solutions and evaluating the impact. And so, go to the next slide. So we're right at the end of phase 2 now. So we're in the process of drafting that report and the implementation plan that will really push into phase 3 of investing that money directly in the community. In terms of the site selection process, that was part of phase 1. In discussing where to focus on with the advisory committee, the criteria included that the area must have a higher than average child poverty rate and higher than average number of children living in poverty, as well as higher than average child vulnerability rates. That it be home to many Indigenous children, that it be centrally located so that it's accessible to families and their children, and that it include diverse amenities available to families. And so through using those criteria and then having these conversations with advisory committee members, this kind of subsection of Squamish South that you see, which includes the Stotmas Reserve and stops at, I think, Mamquam Road, if I remember correctly, was selected. I know the border is not very, very clear, but that is the site that has been selected as kind of that sub-focus within Squamish for initiatives to take place. And so using that, we got into some engagement with the families, and this is really where Emily Carr, the Health Design Lab, had all of these amazing creative solutions and ideas and ways of engaging families. So some of the questions that underpinned the engagement included, what is special about your community? What is the strength and challenge? And they created this beautiful dream catcher and had people write the strength on one side and the challenge on the other. So even working with Squamish Nation to develop some tools that were culturally appropriate as well for the families in Squamish Nation that we were working with through this exploratory phase. So that was one activity. And then if you look at the pictures up there, there's a couple of worksheets where there's some balloons and clouds and rocks. And so that activity was around asking, what are your hopes and your needs for your child? So the hopes are the balloons and the clouds, and the needs are the rocks that are the foundation that need to happen so that those dreams can eventually be reached. There was also a mapping activity. So what are the places that you go to in your community, and what are some places that you would like to have existing in the community, what you wish for? And then there was also a bubble diagram worksheet, which is the picture on the far right there, which was looking at what do you wish for your community, and we had those organized somewhat thematically. And so the themes that emerged are listed up here as well. So looking at things like accessing services. We heard a lot from the Squamish Nation members who participated around cultural safety and reconciliation and need to work on those elements. Healthy food, so accessing that as a foundational piece for childhood wellness. Information and resource sharing, so not necessarily knowing where to go to find out what's available for their kids. Mental health supports for both parents and children, and looking at ways to integrate those perhaps better together. Looking at safety and infrastructure improvements, so things as simple as four-way stops in particular areas. A lot around transportation as well that was related to the infrastructure, which is its own theme though. School and education too. So how can schools and potentially childcares as well play a role in increasing childhood wellness and reducing some of those vulnerabilities before kids get to kindergarten? focus on special needs and learning differences, and then a broader theme around systems change and advocacy. So we were mindful throughout this that it could be quite easy to end up with a kind of program model of, okay, there's an issue with healthy food, let's design a program for that and that kind of thing, and recognizing that this is actually a really exciting opportunity to create some systemic changes around how childhood vulnerability is addressed in Squamish, and using that as a foundation for some of those shifts. So those are some of those themes. And then in terms of where we actually went, sorry if you want to go back briefly. So we worked with Ali and then some of the Squamish Nation Advisory Committee members to really figure out how to get a good spread of parents involved in all of these activities. And so we went to the IS Menman Program House, the Healthy Pregnancy Outreach Program. We did a workshop during the childcare strategy workshop, so using that space as an opportunity to get a bit of feedback from parents at that point as well, which was great. The cooking group at Castle Rock Family Housing, the Childcare Resources and Referral Squamish Play Group, which had, I think, something like 30 kids and parents running around the day that we did events. And then we also had an event specifically for Squamish Nation families at Totem Hall, which was a full day, and ended with a ceremony where we honored the parents for the work that they did to lift their children up. And that was a really beautiful opportunity to activate principles of reconciliation and actually work in collaboration with the nation to do things differently in the process. So in terms of the emerging framework, the vision is that together Avenues of Change partners and families have built bridges across cultures and communities in Squamish, and all families feel safe, supported, and welcome as they raise their young children. And then the specific goals or kind of areas of action are to develop cultural safety and humility across communities in Squamish, to increase supports for vulnerable families and single parents to both navigate and access programs and services, to enhance the integration between mental health services and other supports for families and children, and to expand the opportunities for every child to attend preschool. So these are those four main areas. And then in terms of the pillars of the approach, we're proposing that there be kind of a top-down systems change shift combined with grassroots supports that's kind of more bottom-up, with 3 nested kind of big actions, and then a number of additional actions and initiatives that would fall within that. So I'll walk you through this diagram a little bit.
We are running really late, so yeah.
Apologies. Okay. So essentially, it's a combination of taking those goals into action. So developing a protocol between some of the agencies that are working in town and the Squamish Nation to better knit those communities together. An agency liaison who would work with the nation and with the agencies to activate the principles of the protocol, and then family navigators who would actually be working with mostly Squamish Nation children and families to get them to access services that they are not feeling safe or comfortable going to alone now. So it does have a focus on Squamish Nation families, and the reason is that that is where the most vulnerable children are. And so by focusing on the children and the families there would be a ripple effect out where all families would be lifted up through the process. So at this point, we're just taking the rest of the actions that have been prioritized by partners and putting that into the implementation plan with some budgetary recommendations, and then you'll be off to the races and starting to do all the things. So that's the update. Thank you.
Staff, as participating on the steering group, will bring back an update to the new council as this final kind of piece comes together, so that all partners can sort of better understand some of the recommendations and the ideas that are coming forward to help direct the funding. So council will be part of that discussion, and there'll be a joint presentation with school district. Squamish Nation will bring everyone together.
Mm-hmm. And the hope for that is mid-November.
November, that's
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a really exciting project. We look forward to seeing that roll out and see the results of that idea. Thank you very much for everyone for participating. Really appreciate it. Really good work. Just to get out there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
We're going to take a 3-minute recess, and then we'll be back for item 2. We are back in our committee of the whole meeting. We are on item 3.2. hopefully the last iteration of our community many contribution policy that's been evolutionary over the last 3 years.
We are indeed hopeful. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Gary Buxton, the General Manager, and Jonas Velenskis, Director of Community Planning, with what hopefully is results in adoption of the CAC policy. We were last here on October the 2nd, and Council at that point gave us some direction to head away and deal with contributions for rental housing, childcare facilities, and we'd noted some sort of administrative changes, some sections that were repetitive and needed to be deleted. So we've gone back and made the changes to the policy that's attached to the staff report. When we did that, particularly dealing with the trying to differentiate how CACs for rental, purpose-built rental units were dealt with, the table got unmanageable in its previous format. So what we had to do is basically take the table out, put it at the end, and reformat it. It looks like it's changed a great deal, but it really has not, other than we've addressed the issues of, excuse me, of council wanting us to deal with the purpose-built rental differently. So just in terms of moving to the table on page that starts now at the end of the policy on page 8 of the policy itself, I'm not sure which.
110.
Yeah, so now it's we have the category of application, so single or 2-unit application. We've also made the change under Council's direction that where there's a dedication, there's also a smaller but lesser cash contribution to critical amenities. So there's a bit of both, that it's not one or the other, along with the active transportation and parks. Option B is when you move to under the single or 2-unit residential, is when you move to the pure cash contribution, and that's been up again from the 15 to 20,000. When you get into the subsection 2, you have the, excuse me, the multifamily or residential or mixed use. Again, an affordable housing provision, cash contribution, transportation, active transportation and park. Again, option B, cash in lieu, again, it's higher on a square footage basis. And then the lesser amount, just below 5 per square foot of additional purpose-built market rental gross floor area. So again, that's where we've tried to differentiate between a rental and the for sale. So that's really, I don't think I need to go any further through the table. It looks radically different. It frankly isn't, other than trying to A, deal with the purpose-built rental, and B, require that when there's a provision of housing, there's also a lesser cash contribution to critical amenities. The definition of critical amenities on the second page of the policy has at the very end of that paragraph provision of childcare facilities as otherwise directed. So it was a bit more work than we'd anticipated. We think we've got Council's intent from the last meeting. So the recommendation is that Council approve the CAC policy. We're open to questions.
I have a question myself, and then Doug. I just want to make sure, and it seems, and by the way, the reformatting actually helped me understand it a lot better, so thank you.
You can thank Mr. Velenskis for
that. I just want to make sure that all the options within each section are leaning towards our preferred option just a little bit. And the options are there to provide some flexibility, but do you think they, like ultimately we'd like to see more units built as the main goal? So do they lean a little more heavily in favor of encouraging that versus the other ones? Would you say that's fair to say? I just don't want to discourage ultimately what the intention is.
I think so, and our message to the applicants is option A is our preferred option in all of these scenarios, which is the units with some cash. And at the end of the day, it's Council's decision to proceed with the offer.
Okay. Councilor.
Thank you. And so just because of the previous conversation, this to me is receiving the money. How we apply it is actually a separate set of decisions, which is really not contained in here. I know you talk about critical amenities, but from time to time, that could change with council resolution, really. So I guess what I'm saying is, just for clarity, and it helps me, this is just purely receiving as opposed to disposal. We're spending the money.
Correct.
And we can deal with that separately as we see fit.
Exactly. It gives council the flexibility to deal with it outside of this CAC scope.
And there may even be policies that future councils want to consider, like until such time as we've achieved 1 in 30 childcare spaces.
30 to 100.
30 to 1. 30 to 100 childcare spaces that we try to allocate X amount of these dollars. Like, council can do internal policies that help direct that. Okay. That's correct.
It's not on that subject, but I see single lots are now, is that a new thing, 20,000 for a single lot subdivision?
No, that's what it was before.
And then the other one, just refresh my old memory here on the, where you make people do a performa. So,
We're not recommending that that's the go-to.
no, maybe not the go-to, but you still have the option to.
Yes, we do.
Because I don't know if you look at some of the media out there, we're getting beat up for giving our developments away.
And I don't believe we are with this policy.
I don't believe we are either.
I wouldn't recommend it to council if I thought that was the case.
I mean, I like the idea, I would have liked to see the performer on the old Cat West side.
As would we.
Anyway, it's up to you guys.
Quite the contrary. Council, policy is at council's discretion.
Yeah.
Absent 10.
Yeah.
Throw that.
Councilor Elliott?
So in section 3, we talk about greenfield development. And I just want to clarify, so there's a little typo in there, it says above. See the target line above, but they're below now.
We thought we'd caught all of
Do you want
those.
to tell me what page?
This is 105. But I just want to confirm that what we see in the table is, these are the starting points. So where it says, in a greenfield development, the minimum we'd accept. No, I can't find it. What are the ones that we talked about? Oh, an additional 3,000 per new single-detached lot for greenfield development application.
In the table at the end.
In the table?
Yes.
So those are all, that's the minimum, that's what that section 3 is saying. This is a starting point for negotiation.
Yes.
So it can't be more than that.
Yes.
And then, I think we may have talked about this last time, but I'm hoping council can remind me. On page 112, on the on-site affordable housing provision, for purpose-built market rental, we talk about a minimum of 5% of the principal units being affordable housing, where everywhere else we talk about 10. And how did we justify not asking for 10 in that circumstance? Because we thought they couldn't afford it, or did we?
It was to facilitate 100% purpose-built rental projects. So that was a policy that carried on from the previous version.
And we didn't want to necessarily discourage the 100% purpose-built rental by creating too onerous of non-market. I mean, it's up for discussion, but I think there was some rationale to, you can tip that too far and then all of a sudden people just won't go for a purpose-built rental, which is a fundamental part of the continuum we're trying to achieve.
Just wanted to refresh. Thank you.
Any other questions?
We will make that correction, that typographical correction, third line, fourth line from the bottom on section 3, table below rather than above table.
It should just say tables 1 and 2. Yeah.
And to follow up on your question, like, I know we talk about capturing the need for childcare, but where would we legitimately capture that so that it doesn't get lost?
I guess maybe through me to Jonas or Gary, like, I mean, ultimately, it's up to the next council to make it a priority. Hopefully, we've done some, like, the presentation before was some pretty persuasive information to outline the need and the need for attention, not just in the near term, but in perpetuity, really. So, I mean.
But where do we establish those targets?
Yeah, I mean, you can establish it in this policy, you don't have to. I think what Councilor Race is saying is that can be a subsequent discussion. Or if there's a specific need, council can always, it's a policy, it can be amended at any time, it can be tweaked. But, so outside of this policy, how would you recommend making sure things like daycare don't get lost?
Well, council does have a specific policy on that. You know, that 5% of the CACs until we reach a certain point are dedicated towards childcare or reserved for childcare.
Mayor Heisman, may I recommend, one of the things I like about this policy is the critical amenities and the fact that you put childcare being one of those. So essentially, the policy also indicates that you require a financial planning process to bring out of those provisions in CAC. The beauty of the way it's structured now is our current provision has tiny little bits all earmarked for certain things, and then you come and you say, can we go use CAC? And I say, well, not really, because we designated for this use. I'm suggesting don't designate it for that use. That allows council to have that flexibility. Next financial plan, if you decide critical amenities need to be facility or it needs to be childcare, you have a bigger pot and more flexibility. So that's what I actually like about this latest version.
I like that too. What I'm asking is where do we capture that target of reaching 30 spots per 100? Like, where is the best place to lock that in so that it doesn't get locked? We have so many critical amenities we need to build, but part of our economic development is higher participation in the workforce, which means we need childcare.
If I might just add that right now we put that childcare access rate as a target within the official community plan as one of the 30 indicators. So we put our 2016 baseline, and then where it says future target, it says to be established coming out of the childcare strategy. So once we do that work with the implementation committee, we can come forward to the next council, recommend a specific target with the plan around where those spaces, where the spaces should be created, distributed, like what the plan is for that. And then we can actually track annually through our annual reporting based on our baseline, based on our reach target, and then we'll report back to council every year on how we're progressing based on targets. So I would say we don't have to amend the OCP, but we've already laid the groundwork as an indicator within the OCP, and so we'll be coming back to council once that target's established.
Yeah, thank you. My view of that was that it would be tied to priorities set by council from time to time and kind of informed by that. And further what Ms. Matthews said, one of the reasons I was not really disturbed by it coming out because I thought the previous policy of, I think it was 70%, 20%, or 25%, 5%, whatever the numbers were, was quite prescriptive and didn't give us the flexibility that we might want to have. And so my thinking is when the next council identifies priorities, perhaps there could be a separate policy dealing with application of funds from that or not, just depending on how prescriptive we want it to be. But I think, that was my first question, I think it's a separate decision and perhaps a separate policy.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think that if you look at the neighborhood plans or the hubs, there's one. Put over there. Oh, sorry. If you look at the neighborhood plans as we're going through the neighborhood planning processes too, when you get a development with 30 units in it, make sure that they get one or two that are structurally and safety-wise designed for daycares. It'll still be a 3-bedroom apartment, but it has an extra fire door, or it has all these little things that go in it to make it potential for a daycare. Because, you know, you're hearing people now that they want to go from 8 to 16 and they can't. So I would say, what you're saying, though, is you got it in there, especially in those neighborhood pods, close to, I don't know if you need to make that policy to, when someone's building a 40-plex, get 2 units set up for daycares.
I think we already have that type of policy in the OCP.
Yeah, there's a policy driving at integrating and co-locating childcare spaces, and so through the development review and process and negotiations with the development community, we can try and target those spaces to be created where they're best located. You know, some communities, they will actually zone those specific uses. They'll look for dedication of space to the local government, which helps with affordability, because as a municipal facility, it can be leased out to nonprofits, and then the rates are kept more affordable because it's not as like a non-profit kind of dedicated space for childcare. So,
Well, I was thinking more apartments, not necessarily
right.
schools.
Okay.
You know, just the safety
Residential
of the
facilities.
part of it.
Yeah.
I don't have any more hands. I'm going to recommend council that we move this forward. We have been tweaking this for part of 3 years, it feels like. It's been iterative, and it's been used along the way and continually modified. But I think it's at the point where we put a lot of thought into this. The next council can tweak and modify depending on the influences out there in the development community and other things. But at this point, I think this is a good start. The formatting is way better for me to understand. I read through it and I got it without reading through it 2 or 3 or 4 times, which is helpful. So I will move that we recommend to council that we approve the community many contribution policy and put it on tonight's agenda. Moved by seconded by Councillor Race. I will call question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, motion carries. My apologies. Did anyone want to ask a question about that? Great. Thanks. Yep, Matt, come up to the table, or the podium, either, whatever.
Okay.
We were so close.
No, just really quick. Edward Archibald brought up some interesting points. Matt Blackman's Edward Archibald brought up some points about CAC being insufficient in the case of the Beverly Springs development. What is the, and I thought they were valid, what is the feeling from council and the district on what his comments and criticisms were? Did you see they were?
I don't know if that's fair for staff to respond
or
to, but
someone.
I'll respond to it.
Okay.
I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head.
Well, he said $8 million short. He's were his numbers based on the living value.
Yeah, I don't think his numbers were based on reality, but.
Okay. I'm just curious.
But I can't remember the exact amount, but the CAC was about, even though it was based on the interim draft policy, it was actually closer to what this policy is outlining now.
Okay, so it's below the
It was $25 as
25,
opposed to
right.
whatever, 18. Yeah.
I could clarify what the case
Yeah,
was. It was $25 per square foot.
Right, I was aware of that.
Yeah, but that included affordable housing and everything in. So
Right.
it was a bit of a different proposal than what our policy is aiming at for now, but it was in the ballpark, as some would say.
Okay. Now, as someone who's not a developer, I didn't know what the homework was. Because they were
I don't think he wasn't doing the math appropriately in my opinion.
all talking. Thank you very much.
Doug, do you want to add that?
Well, just the response that was given by the developer to that comment was that was applicable to serviced land. Beverly Springs was not serviced land.
Good point. Thank you.
I'm not sure we differentiate. We have a number in there for Greenfield, and we define that within the policy. But we don't necessarily. I guess it is. There is actually stuff in there that speaks to service, and then you add a couple more $1,000 if it's unserviced or Greenfield, and so. Anyway, it's within the ballpark of this, which is absolutely within the ballpark of, I think, a lot of other communities out there. In fact, it's way higher than most communities.
The concern is it's a very complicated calculation, so it's hard to understand, quite frankly, so.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
just
I
trying to
think
come to
this,
terms with
I
it.
think this policy actually simplifies it quite a bit.
Well, that's great, I look
Yeah.
forward to seeing that, thank you.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, everybody. We voted, did you not? Yes. Yeah. Do you mind if we break for 2 minutes?
Not at all.
Thank you, everyone. We are on to item 3, discussion around Darrell Bay and WLNG, as well as other possible entities down there. I will pass it over to Neil.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So just here to
Maybe
provide...
just introduce
Sorry,
yourself.
yes. Here, Neil Plum, Manager of Real Estate, and Matt Gill, Real Estate Portfolio Administrator. And just here to give Council a bit of an update on where we're at with Darrell Bay. Last time we were here was July 17th, and given that we're getting sort of close to the end of this term with this Council, we wanted to give Council a heads up on what's transpired since then, and just give you a bit of an idea where things might be going from here, or what the process might look like. So back on July 17th, Council gave staff the direction, and actually the Mayor, to move forward with conversations with MOTI around preferring to see more multiple collaborative uses in the for WLNG area in the Darrell Bay Foreshore license area. And so from that, because up to that point, a lot of discussions with LNG had been seeming to be pointing towards exclusive use of the area south of the CN rail crossing. So we've gone off since then. We've had 2 separate meetings with MOTI, with WLNG and the district. Ourselves, myself and the Mayor have been at those meetings. Councillor Ray's attended one of those meetings as well. And one happened in August and one occurred in September. And what we've been trying to explore further is learning more about also what MOTI's jurisdiction is down there, what this ministerial, I have a hard time pronouncing, ministerial order, what it entails, what it means, and I'll speak a little bit more to that in a second. And we had some further discussions with WLNG about what shared use scenarios might look like, and given the lay of the land down there. And so I'm just going to move forward there. I will say, we've done a lot of work with the real estate department over the years with many projects and files. This is probably one of the most complicated jurisdictional areas we've worked in. There's a lot going on down there, and working from old maps and things. So basically where we're at, what we've learned from our discussions with MOTI is that they've been given direction from Crown Lands to administer the land down there in the areas in red. I appreciate it being a little bit hard to see up there. And that's largely for ferry terminal, or mainly only for ferry terminal use. That's the only really permitted use down there in the red polygons. Public access, although the public does go down there and park and accesses the water informally, it's not formally permitted. There's not a formal agreement with MOTI and the district or some other entity to allow the public to go down there, and that's largely to manage risk around the ferry dock. So there has been in this process with WLNG, other entities have moved forward to say that express interest in using that area, what I'll call the South Bay area in red. But in talking to MOTI, they're not in a position right now to entertain any public use of that water lot, given that the order only speaks to a ferry terminal. And so to actually allow any kind of public or commercial recreation access into that South Bay area, needs to be an amendment made to the ministerial order. So we've talked a little bit about that with them. What is that?
Let's go back to that map for a second.
Sure.
What's the difference between the solid red line and the dashed red line?
The solid red line are lands that came through to MOTI under the actual ministerial order. The dashed red lines actually came to them under a separate agreement with Flint Row. So we've talked about the ministerial order in the past. It is on the solid lines, but MOTI also has jurisdiction over the dotted lines through arrangements with Flint Row.
So Flint Row has no jurisdiction in this area at all?
Not right now, that's my understanding, yeah. So, although I will say, if I back up for a second, they do have jurisdiction still over the North Bay area.
Yeah, outside of there.
Outside of there, yeah. So, talking to MOTI to get the ministerial order amended, what they've indicated is they would be looking to see a compelling or comprehensive management plan of the area. The ministerial orders aren't things that get changed typically every day. So for them to consider changing the ministerial order, they'd want to see a comprehensive plan for the future of the area to understand what's being proposed. Something that they would likely be expecting the district or the community to lead as opposed to a single private entity per se. And they'd probably engage in some pretty significant analysis to make sure that what was being proposed was not going to conflict with their operation of the emergency facility. And that ultimately will take some time to proceed. So that's not something that can be changed fairly quickly in the here and now. So in terms of, so that provides a little bit of context as to why MOTI is exploring the lease with WLNG. They've indicated that the use is permitted under the ministerial order. And it has been used as a ferry terminal in the past for the wood fiber project. And they don't see it the way what's being potentially considered there as being a conflict with their dock. So for that reason, they're entertaining a lease with LNG. They did have expressed through the meetings we've had with them that they do want to continue to work collaboratively with us. If I go back to the original conversation that we had, the original direction from council, which was on July 17th, we went to them with this motion and said we want to work with you, and they responded by organizing meetings, and in those meetings they've explained their position more, and they've also are encouraging WLNG to consider shared use scenarios down there. So they are again expressing a willingness to work collaboratively. They said that we will have some ability to comment on their proposed lease with WLNG. They've also, from a shared use perspective, there was some discussion between the agreement between WLNG and MOTI that there be some language in there to allow for subtenants on their dock to use it, as long as they're compatible with the ministerial order. Haven't seen what that language looks like yet, but as a concept, it's been discussed. We've had some discussions about public access to water down there, and they have expressed a willingness to explore reducing the ministerial order that's in front of the North Bay, if you can remember the earlier slide, and even possibly a small amount of public access into the South Bay, which is the area that WLNG is looking at, to create a pathway for small paddle boards and kayaks to be able to access out into the South Bay from there. And then WLNG has indicated they will come forward with a formal proposal later this fall that would build into it the provision for some shared uses to occur down the road. If a commercial entity wants to come forward and use some of the area down there, that they would enter and consider that in the context of their lease. So in terms of next steps, what we see happening is that on the MOT land in red, that they will continue their negotiations, continue to hopefully collaborate with the district on what that looks like. They have indicated that before they finalize an agreement with WLNG, they will definitely check back in with the district to see how the district's negotiations with LNG are proceeding, recognizing that even if MOTI enters into a lease with WLNG down there, that there's probably going to be some access through district property that may be required. So they want to see how that's going with us and them. In terms of the green polygon, the green polygon actually outlines the only district land that is being discussed right now south of the rail line. And whereas I said earlier, we're expecting LNG to come forward with some type of proposal later this fall.
Yeah. On the red polygon to the north end, it encompasses, that's part of the ministerial order, it encompasses our road right away. How did that happen?
This again, one of the things we're probably going to have come out of this at the end of the day when the dust settles is just to get this area properly surveyed. These plans go back a long time. There's a whole bunch of a sequence of events that have occurred to create these property lines right here. So yeah, so that's the whole area originally was under a highway plan. The whole Darrell Bay Road area was all under the highway plans that were associated with the Sea to Sky Highway. And so over time, different plans have been layered in. So, and there's been documents that have been created at MOTI that say district has control over MOTI, but that was never reflected in any surveys. So we do need to get this all cleaned up at the end of the day. In terms of the orange area, you'll see there's to the North Bay, there's a ministerial order there. We'll continue to work with MOTI to see what was involved in having that area basically eliminated because it's not really required for the ferry terminal purposes. The orange area up against the North Bay was included in the ministerial order because it was tied to the lot to the south legally. So that's something we'll explore with them. And then you can also see there's an orange polygon coming into the South Bay along the east side there, which would be a possible area down the road to create future public access. The South Bay, we're going to have the one applicant who expressed interest in putting a water taxi down there, have conversations directly with WLNG about what their shared use might look like. In terms of the North Bay, several of the commercial rec operators that expressed interest in the South Bay they understand there may be a reality of this to the South Bay and the ministerial order that may take some time. So they are going to work with the district to try and explore what an access might look like into the North Bay in the here and now in the more nearer term. So we would work with them because that could be some public access in there as well. So that's some due diligence to be done around there to see what can be done with the North Bay. And then in terms of parking down below the rail line there, I think one of the things that would be helpful in this whole process is that we do identify what parking the district may want to see down there full-time for public access and what commercial operators might be required in the future so that if and when the LNG proposal comes in, we have that context.
And just to maybe put your cursor over that piece of land the district has on the north side.
It doesn't work on this one, unfortunately. So the green one on the west side of the road?
Yeah. Well, yeah, except it's not green.
It's the bulge by Harvard.
The bulge near the 99.
Sorry,
border.
correct, yeah.
And so just that is also district lands, which
Correct.
in theory could be part of this
Thank you.
conversation.
Yeah. So that's it for me. Just turn it back over to council for any questions.
Yeah, this is on the agenda mostly because the last meeting we had, very end of September, WLNG was very much, we need to get a deal done by the end of October. But I gather after a conversation happened last night, yesterday, they're taking the pedal off the accelerator and they're going back to the drawing board a bit and will likely come sometime in November or December with a more formalized application or proposal. So, any questions? Why don't we just deal with questions quickly, Councillor Elliott?
Can you go back to the process slide of what we would need to do to amend the ministerial order? So, one of the things that we were talking about is after construction, so LNG originally asked for exclusive use for 4 years during construction. And we sort of said, can we have shared use? But what it looks like to me is under this ministerial order, that shared use idea is sort of moot because the ministerial order doesn't allow it. So why wouldn't we start this process to ensure that by the time we get to the extent, like the exclusive use piece, we actually have a dock we can use?
And the ministerial order doesn't speak to exclusive use, it just speaks to one use, so it could be multiple.
Exclusive use as a ferry.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean exclusive to WLNG, it just means it has to be used as ferry.
So through, Mayor? Absolutely, and that's something that we will do. I just didn't actually put on the slide deck, but it's going to take some time. I think what MOTI wants to see is a comprehensive plan, community engagement. They want to know that this is a plan that's going to have success. So I think that the time to move forward that is in the near term. we've got a bunch of things here that we need to kind of clean up right away, and then once we get those sort of off and running, then we can start the planning process for the bigger, the longer term.
And the reason I'm thinking this is how that dock gets designed. Can't just be designed for their use today, if ultimately we want to turn it into a shared use facility
Yeah,
for
good point.
kayaks and paddle boards. It can't just be designed for large boats. It's got to accommodate those folks as well. So in sort of stating our intent to go down that road, it helps them figure out what they need to design.
Yeah, it's a great point, thanks.
And just, I'll go to Doug and Peter in a sec, just to actually give kudos to MOTI. They very much have expressed a desire to not have exclusive use down there and to work with local commercial businesses and to a lesser extent the public, just because the public's not allowed technically in that area right now, technically, according to the ministerial order. But they've actually, I think, been very definitive on wanting to explore this option, so I thank them for that. Doug and then Peter.
Thank you. Could you go back to the slide with the green district land on it, please? It's one of the last ones, I think. Right. So what we're talking about, and to Councillor Elliott's point, is ultimately carving up the water lot on the South Bay or separating it to allow for a portion for more public access. And that was my point, or one of my points was, one of the things we've talked to WLNG about is the possibility of legacy facilities. And I know we're not in a discussion about the lease terms now. So if we are going to carve up that, somehow carve up the South Bay ministerial order, we want to contemplate legacy facilities for a variety of different uses. And somehow we can separate the public from the ferry dock, and that's probably relatively easy to do. So that was one point. But the other is, and I know it's not really the topic of this, but it's a discussion point in the community right now, is taxation of whatever lease lands WLNG might end up with here. And I just want to be clear, because my understanding is that even though it's district land now and we're not paying taxes on it, if the private business goes on to that as a leaseholder, my understanding is it gets assessed and they get taxed on whatever the assessed value is. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, typically with leases that are over 2 years, the BC assessment will honor them and they'll go on the tax roll. They don't do, if it's like a 1 year deal, they typically won't do it, but or short term, but longer term deals they do. We'll just confirm whether they treat licenses and leases the same way. Sometimes there's a distinction, but we'll check into that and be aware of that.
But just to be clear, it would be assessed on what the use is.
Yes.
The parking lot would be assessed as parking lot, not a...
Yeah, and the improvements that are on it, yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, on the question of the ministerial order, you said a year plus for the process. I'm just wondering if you feel confident in that, because sometimes MLT I thought was expeditious in my mind.
Through you, Mayor, I mean, that's a bit of a dart on the dartboard in terms of timing. I mean, there would be a lot, there would be community engagement. They'd probably want some work to be done there to figure that out. And then approvals, there could be consultation with First Nations and lots of different things. So, I mean, I just said 1 year plus, and I could have put the plus in.
Ministerial orders can be as fast as they want to do it, or
Well,
as slow as they want to do it.
Well, for sure, and there's a subtle distinction, but like, for example, in the South Bay area, where you see the orange sliver coming down, what we've talked to them about is actually excluding that from the lease that they give to WLNG. So it's not even in their lease area, it's excluded. And then we talked about reducing the ministerial order in the future so that the land would go back to Flinroe, and then we can now go apply to Flinroe for a license for public access along that orange sliver. And we concluded it would be easier for the MOTI to shrink their ministerial order than change the uses in their ministerial order. So that's the approach that we were talking about on the orange polygon. So I know it's the sort of subtle distinctions, but there's a lot of nuances with the different legalities on this, but yeah.
Thanks. Can you just slip back now to that page that shows where you're kind of asking the district to do some kind of what you're doing here? Just get it right back up, that last one, district-led initiative, not private party, and, you know, kind of, I remember 4 years ago talking about this, and we talked about a master plan for that area down there, remember that?
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, that's exactly, so is that district-led initiative similar to a master plan? So you'll be engaging stakeholders and...
Absolutely. Mayor, they don't, I think at the end of the day, if the ministerial order is going to be amended, they want to amend it with probably with one party. If it's going to be a situation where there's going to be public access down there, commercial access down there, they don't want to get into managing 5 or 6 or 7 different leases, including the public's use. So we probably would be the one to lead that charge and take over a master agreement. And that plan that would accompany that would be something that we would probably lead.
Well, I think, you know, they're kind of saying the district's going to do that. So in saying that, your master plan is here, you know, like to do a master plan of that area down there, a year or 2. So in the interim, do we have, we just go through those other steps just slowly? And so we can't really make any decisions for a year or 2 because it's going to be in a process.
No, maybe outline the different timelines and the different processes, you know, potentially.
Sure, yeah, what could happen is, I think what this is pointing to is that it opens the door probably more for a lease with WLNG on the South Bay. Because there's nothing else that's going to be permitted down there right now. So that gives some time to actually go and do the plan and the process. So although a potential 4-year lease of that area to WLNG can seem daunting to some parts of the community, it may take us 2 to 3 years to actually get a plan together to actually use that for the intents and purposes we want to use it for. Yeah.
Oh, the whole vision, for sure. Yeah. Now, in our conversations with MOTI, I mean, they want to get to a lease agreement with WLNG. They're motivated by that. On the red areas, essentially. Our agreement with whomever, whether we enter into agreement or not, or make it all shared use, whatever council in the future decides to do, is only on the green areas, and the green area not shown in this, which is on the other side of the tracks.
Right.
So ours is, although connected to MOTI, and perhaps our stance on this would be taken into consideration by MOTI in terms of how they deal with their negotiation with WLNG or other parties. I think they're connected.
Yeah.
That's fair. I don't be too ambiguous.
Yeah.
So I'll just quickly, if there's anyone in the public who wants to ask a question about this, you come up to the podium and go ahead.
I'm Matt Blackman, Garibaldi Highlands. A number of questions. First of all, at North Bay area, just to the north of that orange line, there's that land, the foreshore land, and then also the other area outlined in gray, which I'm assuming is land. Is that district land or who? Or is
The
that
railway corridor, the one that snakes.
Well, where the North Bay is the land, there's actually land to the right and down. There's actually land there because that's part land, part ocean. That land.
It's either Klahani, it's either private property,
Okay.
or it's Winrow.
And then the little island, the little gray area, it looks like kind of a bit
That's
of an...
private property.
It's all private property. So really, as far as, there's no real district land in there.
All the green stuff, all the roadways is district land. And there's polygons of green stuff that aren't shown on this map.
Okay, I mean, my concern is that, and this is, I was hoping to make this more of an election issue, I've talked to Ted about this, but really, we do not, at least as far as I can tell, we don't have a motorized boat launch under the new SODC plan. It's, I talked to Newport, they're basically putting in, you know, a kayak and paddleboard, so you have to carry something on your head or on your shoulder. You can't even take a light fishing boat with an electric motor. So this would be one potential site for a motorized boat launch.
Yeah, we have brought it up in the discussions for sure. Currently, with the ministerial order, we have no ability to put a boat launch in there, so that's part of the ongoing conversation. It may not be the right slope and everything for a boat launch. I know someone did a bit of an analysis a couple of years ago or so that showed it to be a $700,000 boat launch because of the grade of the slope and everything. Like it unfortunately may not be ideal, it may not have enough parking, it may not, but it's definitely been something we've brought up in the conversation, but currently with the ministerial order, in fact, there's no there's no place to put it there, we can't put it there.
And this is slightly off topic, but it's pertinent. Are there any other areas in town that could be motorized boat launches? Because it
There
seems to
could
be a
be, but
gray
that's
area.
not the topic of this conversation,
Fair enough.
and we're already over time, so I'm gonna cut you off
All
there.
right, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Got
But just a couple of go forwards is the North Bay, because we did have a discussion around public access and how we could get it there sooner rather than later. And the North Bay is a water lot lease with Flinro. It's not part of the ministerial order. And it reminded me I was supposed to give you a name for the person of Flinro, and I haven't, but I will. But that could happen. We could start moving on that relatively quickly. And that's a separate process. It's not part of that order. And the second thing is if we could get MOTI to agree to shrink the water lot that they are leasing to WLNG to allow for that little orange strip down the side there to be outside of the WLNG lease. What they told us, and maybe it's not that totally public, but if the public was using that for access in the short term, it would just be a non-conforming use. And you could maybe fence it off with a little string of logs or something like that to allow the public to get down there. Because the North Bay, as people probably know, dries out at lower tides. And it's probably not suitable for motorized craft, but could be for kayak paddleboards and stuff under most tides. So there is possibilities going forward to have relatively quick public access down there to a point. The longer term plan, it's talked about, would consider, from my perspective at least, would consider the possibility of a boat ramp. But when you go down there and look at it, the parking lot part where the green is and that little red square is about 10 feet above the water. There's a lot of work to put a boat ramp in there. You either have to pull it back or you have to go forward, and it's not a simple thing. And then the other thing is where the parking of the trailers and the pickup trucks go. So not wanting to get onto that, I know it's sort of probably...
I'm just wondering, is it possible to have a paid to help offset the cost, a use paid, like a parking fee or something?
That happens in other places. But anyway, so I just going forward, I mean, I think there are some steps that we can start going on relatively quickly. Ministerial orders, maybe a bigger bite.
So just on, I want to try to wrap this conversation up. Just on some of the things I've heard that as this moves along, and it won't be this council but the next, the design of the dock is important in terms of making sure that it's useful to more than just the large taxi vessels that WLNG is proposing. We want to get an understanding of the assessed value of the land, if it is going to be taxed actually taxed in the future. That we work towards obtaining public access in that area that currently technically doesn't exist in the foreshore areas. That we still work towards shared opportunity for other commercial entities in that area. And I think the other piece, WLNG predominantly needs this for parking cars and buses for their employees. How councils in the future value that, whether it's in some sort of lease or license agreement, or is it just simply paid parking, or do you have reserved spots for different businesses that may or may not be working down there, and designated spots for the public, gondola, whomever else may be part of that, but how the district values the land, I think is important to maximize the return for the citizens of Squamish. Karen.
Just a couple of questions. Has WLNG, since they were here last time, talked about what they're contemplating as improvements down there? I mean, the rail crossing is in really bad shape.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that you could take buses across there. And I know we've got this orange polygon identified at North Bay, but like, who's going to pay for that? To build a dock that would go far enough to allow people access. So
that's all part of the conversation.
I'm just wondering if they have made any comments in that regard about what they would do.
Yeah, in terms of amenities, they haven't put anything formal on the table yet. That's going to be a function somewhat of what things look like at the end of the day when the dust settles in terms of what their offer comes in at, the level of shared use. But what they have discussed is obviously upgrading the CN rail crossing as part of this, repaving the lower Darrell Bay parking lot. They talked about putting lighting in there as well, because there's not really much lighting in there right now. So those are sort of the first three things we've seen from them and casually, but we'll know more when we get the formal offer. In terms of the North Bay area, we've already had some discussions with the proponents who have come forward and expressed interest in this area about the possibility of how this North Bay area go forward and their role in seeing the infrastructure being built. The discussions started out with the district isn't going to pay for it, so to speak. So, we're looking at the commercial operators that are going to be down there and involved in using it to help pay for it, at the same time keeping public access open as well. So we're already starting that discussion around that North Bay area is how to explore that access and who's going to pay for it.
Sorry, just a point. And so we've been talking about the water lots, and we haven't talked again about the fact that they want to just park buses there all day long. So I think we can't really separate those two conversations. I recognize they're being in council, they may feel differently about buses parking there. But if we're still striving for that sliver of public access in the South Bay and have aspirations for public access on the North Bay, it will get used and people will need to park there. And so I don't think LNG can still move forward assuming that the buses park there all day long. Because we're already showing on this map that we have aspirations within the 4 years to put the public down there. And that means they don't want to park at the top and walk down. They want to park next to their sliver and the North Bay. So we haven't talked about the bus parking, but I don't think that you can have this conversation without considering that they're very much connected.
They're definitely connected, and so it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing, but at the same time, I think it would be useful for us before LNG comes forward with a proposal, if we can explore this North Bay, understand how much parking requirements there might be, and put that on the table. I think that would be very useful information.
I think I'd like to get just a general resolution from council, so you at least have marching orders until the next council, because this is an ongoing file that's active. Our conversation is moving the bus parking completely off of there. If the buses are going to be sitting there for 8 or 10 hours, I'm not sure if a bus driver wants to sit there for 8 or 10 hours. Maybe there's a better location in the district that they can do longer term bus parking and that it's just car parking down there. Do you want a motion that sort of outlines some of this, or Jeff, do you have a question?
Just real quick, just about the...
Just start talking and you get...
My name's Jeff Levine, live in 1580.
You don't have to say that, it's not public hearing.
Oh, sorry. So the group I work with, for the costing of that, the new dock, the complete structure, it's fully, we express that we would pay for the entire cost of it, and it would be given complete public access to that area.
Into the North Bay?
Into the North Bay, yeah. So we're already looking at some preliminary costing. However, the group that I work with and part of, it's really important keeping Darrell Bay, the last vestige of public controlled water space, open, and it's full access to the public with some other, like a non-motorized water sports rentals, and people can bring their own kayaks in there as well. And some of that actually might be a better area because it's not as windy, and there are some issues with the elevation or the bathymetry measurements of the lagoon. However, there are other processes that we could endeavor to make it deeper, and that would be our cost. Like if we were to dredge or selectively dredge a channel, and that's in that area, that's something that we would pay for.
No, and that's what council's always been, that's why we've driven this process to where it is, to make sure there's public access.
Yeah, it's 100% public.
And opportunities for other business ventures to succeed in that.
So, yeah, it's a win-win for our community. It's not only is it full public access to an area that's very steep right now, that was very hard to come down to. However, it's somebody else paying for that, as well as private entity paying for that, as well as full public access, and that could be a covenant in place.
Yeah.
Wait, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just a final question. I know we're talking proponents, but we do have a taxpayer down there on a private piece of property. So how are they involved in these ongoing discussions? How are they being kept up to date? Because this necessarily impacts
their quality of life. We're introducing not one new use, but multiple potentially. So I'm just wanting to make sure how we're keeping the public engaged in this conversation.
Thank you. So yeah, since we met with MOTI, we've had, we've gone back to all the stakeholders. We've met with Mr. Levine, we've met with the developer, we've met with the water taxi, and I've had probably 3 or 4 separate meetings with the private owner in the last 2 or 3 weeks, just to keep them apprised of what's going on, get some feedback, get some more ideas. So that's been ongoing and will continue. And then I would suspect as we go forward, if at some point we get a formal proposal from WLNG, we'll be vetting it all up there as well. I think in terms of what the mayor asked for about whether or not we need a motion today, I mean, that's at council's pleasure. I mean, well, everything we're hearing here, we would take back to further discussions with WLNG and share this with them prior to them preparing a proposal. I think it's just up to council whether they want to have, and none of this is necessarily new. I mean, adjusting the dock might be new, but a lot of this is stuff we've already had conversations with them about. So it's up to council to determine how strong they want to make that.
I'm going to suggest we put a motion forward, and I'll kind of spitball it here, just so that it's just really clear and you have, that staff continue to work on this file, taking into consideration design of the dock that WLNG is proposing, and assess land value on taxation, maintaining, or I shouldn't say maintaining, I should say creating public access opportunities, creating shared commercial use opportunities, I'm reiterating a bit of what's already been said, evaluating legacy proposals, an analysis of improvements that WLNG is expected to do, including the railway crossing, and an evaluation on revenue opportunities for the district with regard to parking.
Okay.
And potential amenities. That was sort of in the legacy piece, but legacy and potential amenities. Did you capture most of that? I did. Excellent. I'll move that. Seconded by Doug. Any more conversation? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. Thank you very much. I think that's the end of our agenda. A motion to terminate, moved by Peter, seconded by Doug. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone who participated.